Spider-Man 3 is a fascinating piece of comic book movie history. In a pre-MCU world, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies, along with the X-Men films from Fox, were a huge part of the genre's growth and boom in the early 2000s. With Spider-Man 2 being heralded as one of the best comic book movies ever made, anticipation for Spider-Man 3 was at an all-time high. And, in the end, it was this.
Brutality of it.
The making of Spider-Man 3 in of itself is fascinating. At one point it was split into two parts, at another point had a different villain lineup, and it was supposed to set up a fourth outing for Raimi as director and Tobey Maguire as the friendly neighborhood web-slinger. But it would end up being the end of the road for Raimi and the final outing as the character for Tobey Maguire until the MCU multiverse experiment.
They love me.
Spider-Man 3 saw a creative war between Raimi and producer Avi Arad, and most of that frustration came over the inclusion of one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains, Venom. One party wanted it, and the other one didn't. In the end, the party that wanted it got their way, because they felt that fans wanted to see Venom more than any other classic Spider-Man rogue, but the party that didn't want it, by his own admittance, did not give the character his all. And because of that, those fans that wanted to see Venom on the big screen left dissatisfied with the character's portrayal.
Hey, Parker.
Despite being one of comic books' most popular characters, Venom is only on screen for a small portion of Spider-Man 3's final act and dies rather unceremoniously. In an internet age where forums and flame wars ruled all, Spider-Man 3 became the butt of jokes and memes, which would define the film for nearly 2 decades. Whether it be the Peter Parker dance, Venom's teeth, or this Peter Parker face. But like anything nearly 20 years old, those who were kids when they saw it are now adults and have found things to enjoy within it. A new generation defining it as a misunderstood classic. And part of that fondness comes from the movie's cut material, which arguably could have made the movie better than the final product we got. Some have even petitioned Sony to release the Raimi cut of Spider-Man 3. That cut material includes a whole new character, more for Gwen Stacy, and, importantly, an alternate death scene for Venom. A far more gruesome death for Eddie Brock inside the symbiote. A death that feels very Sam Raimi. A death that, rumor claims, was cut for being too scary. Internet sleuths have spent years piecing together segments from the novelization, prop store auctions, concept art, and even the movie's official toy line to piece together what the true original ending for Spider-Man 3 was supposed to look like. But how much of this is just internet rumor? What really happened with this apparent violent death scene? How much of it is fiction, and what is the truth behind Spider-Man 3's alternate Venom death? Thank you for checking out this cutscene video. If you would like some more cutscene videos, we have now launched our Patreon, patreon.com/cutscene, because unfortunately, YouTube ad revenue is not what it used to be, and what it used to be was bad. So because of that, we have launched a Patreon, patreon.com/cutscene. If you head over there and back now, you can get, and I'm not kidding here, a 5-hour video podcast of myself and WrestleTalk's Ollie Davis talking about Spider-Man 3, reviewing the film scene by scene and breaking down the making of the movie. Legit, it is 5 hours long. Patreon.com/cutscene and get yourself a 5-hour video podcast of us reviewing Spider-Man 3. After spending much of the 1990s in developmental hell, Spider-Man finally swung onto screens in 2002. Directed by Sam Raimi, Spider-Man opened to $114 million and took over $820 million worldwide by the end of its theatrical run. Its sequel came 2 years later and, surprisingly, had a smaller opening weekend and a smaller worldwide total. Even though that figure was still an incredible $780 million and Spider-Man 2 is considered one of the best sequels and comic book movies ever made, the creative minds behind the web-slingers cinematic adventures at Sony knew that something else had to happen for Spider-Man 3. In his book, The Spider-Man Chronicles, producer Grant Curtis wrote that Sam and his brother Ivan Raimi had two words they wanted to focus on for this third outing: new and different. And this new and different direction would need to be acted upon quickly, as Spider-Man 3 was announced a few months before the release of Spider-Man 2, with cinemas booked for May 2007. The Raimis had a central theme they wanted to focus on for Spider-Man 3: forgiveness. In the first movie, Spidey became a hero. In the sequel, he learned if he actually wanted to be that hero, and the third movie would see him learn that not everything needs to be avenged. To that end, the Raimis wanted classic villain the Sandman to be a focal point of the movie and make him Uncle Ben's killer. Sandman suited their story needs because he wasn't a mad scientist or a wicked billionaire, he was just a petty criminal who was accidentally turned into a monster. He wasn't evil, he had evil thrust upon him. By forgiving Sandman for killing Uncle Ben, Peter Parker could grow as Spider-Man. But Sandman needed someone else to go alongside him to show Spider-Man what happens when you don't let go of the greed and hatred. In the original vision for Spider-Man 3, Sandman, knowing he needs someone smarter than him to accomplish his goals, breaks Adrian Toomes, better known as the Vulture, out of prison. Toomes gladly helps as he was put in jail by Spider-Man and now he wants his revenge. Curtis writes in the Spider-Man Chronicles, at the height of this conflict during the final battle of the film, a humbled Spider-Man offers the Vulture the olive branch of peace. Unable to accept it because of the hatred in his heart, the Vulture meets his demise, illustrating to Peter the ramifications of a heart hardened by an inability to forgive. The Raimis completed their 30-page treatment in August 2004, just 2 months after the release of Spider-Man 2. Everyone at Sony loved the treatment, but according to the Spider-Man Chronicles, there was one thing that wasn't quite working. Producer Laura Ziskin is quoted in the book saying, "We kept struggling to build a connection between Peter or Spider-Man and the Vulture. We couldn't. It would have taken a whole story to do that." It was during these early meetings about the movie that Venom's name was brought up. As Eddie Brock, he would have a connection to Parker as a colleague at the Daily Bugle, and as Venom, he is literally connected via the suit and wants revenge for being rejected. The origins of Venom began in the 1980s when Spider-Man bonded with a symbiote suit in Secret Wars number 8. After discovering that it was trying to bond with him permanently, Parker used sonic sound to part with the symbiote and return to his classic red and blue suit. Then in 1988, David Michelin and Tom McFarlane brought the symbiote back and put it on the character of Eddie Brock, a reporter who blames Parker for all of his faults in life. Brock hated Parker, the symbiote hated Spider-Man, and together they formed Venom. As Josh Link wrote for Medium in 2017, Venom became the premier Spider-Man villain in the 1990s. He adds Venom was enormously popular. No villain had broken out and become popular enough to headline his own line of comics like he had during that time. He would also continually pop up in other heroes' comics as well to try and provide a boost to their sales. It was truly an unprecedented phenomenon. This popularity was helped by the smash hit 1994 Spider-Man animated series for Fox Kids and the Maximum Carnage comic series that was not only adapted for the cartoon, but also got its own video game for Sega and Nintendo's home consoles. Fans loved him, but Sam Raimi didn't. He would later tell Uproxx in 2022, "I didn't understand the character that well. It wasn't close to my heart. The best thing I like about Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's Spider-Man is that they made relatable characters that I understand. When I read about Venom, which I hadn't read up as a kid, I had to catch up on it when they wanted him to be in the movie, I didn't recognize enough humanity within that character to be able to identify with him properly." It was Avi Arad who would be the one to push Venom into Spider-Man 3, and it was all down to his popularity with fans. Raimi would tell Collider in April 2007, "Avi Arad said to me, 'Sam, you're not paying attention to the fans enough. You need to think about them. You've made 2 movies now with your favorite villains, and now you're about to make another one with your favorite villains. The fans love Venom. He is the fan favorite. All Spider-Man readers love Venom. And even though you came from the 70s Spider-Man, this is what the kids are thinking about. Please incorporate Venom. Listen to the fans now." More to the point, Venom would be the new and different that Sony wanted for Spider-Man 3, particularly because he was a newer villain. The problem was, Venom had a lot of deep character lore, not to mention the fact he's an alien, and the Raimis had trouble getting him into the script. In November 2004, now working with screenwriter Alvin Sargent, the treatment was now 50 pages long, which then ballooned to a 68-page treatment. This would now need to be a 2-part movie, which they would shoot back to back. Not only would it allow Raimi to keep Vulture in the movie, which ultimately is what he wanted, it got Venom in the movie, which is what Arad wanted, and it also helped with the aging cast still looking like they did in the first 2 movies. However, Arad shot down the 2-part idea, arguing that the ending of Spider-Man 3 didn't resolve anything as everything came to a close in Spider-Man 4, and felt that would frustrate audience members who would feel like they only got to see half a movie. A compromise was made that the Raimis would continue working on a Spider-Man 3 script with Vulture, while Alvin Sargent would work on a Spider-Man 3 script with Venom. As Raimi pushed forward with his vision, he and Grant Curtis met with Sir Ben Kingsley in February 2005 to cast him as the Vulture. In the Spider-Man Chronicles, Curtis knows that the meeting went incredibly well, and Raimi cast him there on the spot, even contacting the costume department to start work on Vulture's outfit. However, as Curtis writes, unfortunately less than a week after Sir Ben walked out of Sam's office, the entire casting process ground to a halt. The script was undergoing major changes, and one of these changes was the replacement of Vulture with Venom. The villain swap became official, and the Vulture's wings were packed away, along with the opportunity to work with Sir Ben Kingsley to make way for Venom's fangs. Vulture was officially removed from Spider-Man 3 in March 2005, and by June, Alvin Sargent handed in a 152-page script for Spider-Man 3, which was eventually whittled down to 128 pages. Curtis, who notes that 120 pages is about the maximum you'd want from a Spider-Man script, writes in the Spider-Man Chronicles, "Some action, some comedy, and some character studies were left behind, but the resulting script expertly retained the indispensable story attributes of its predecessor." Raimi would later tell Collider of the creative process, "Ideally, we would write the script and rewrite the script and finish it, and only then begin the casting process, and only then start storyboarding the piece after rehearsals, and then begin figuring out the effects. But I had to start the effects before I had written a script and cast it before I had written a script. On these big pictures, that's how it works, a simultaneous process. It's like building a house without a blueprint." Released in May 2007, Spider-Man 3 improved upon Spider-Man 2's opening weekend, scoring $151 million, and would also make more money than Spider-Man 2 with nearly $900 million worldwide. But unlike Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 3 was not a critical darling, and the movie's villains were part of the problem. Roger Ebert wrote for the Chicago Sun-Times, "Superhero movies and Bond movies live and die by their villains. Spidey 2 had the superb Doc Ock, who was right up there with Goldfinger and the Joker in the supervillain Hall of Infamy. He had a personality. In Spidey 3, we have too many villains, too little infamy." Peter Bradshaw wrote for The Guardian, "Worst of all, Spider-Man 3 is crippled by an inflation of villain value. Where once a single baddie would do, now you need 2 or 3. While Sukhdev Sandhu wrote for The Telegraph, "The third installment in the Spider-Man saga is cluttered with crooks and fussily plotted." Raimi would tell Collider in 2015, "I tried to make it work, but I didn't really believe in all the characters." So that couldn't be hidden from people who loved Spider-Man. If the director doesn't love something, it's wrong of them to make it when so many other people love it. Arad himself would tell Screen Rant in September 2018, "In all fairness, I'll take the guilt because of what Sammy used to say in all of these interviews, feeling guilty that I forced him into it. And you know what I learned? Don't force anybody into anything." Since the movie's release, tons of behind-the-scenes material and cutscenes have made their way online. Fans pored over the differences between the theatrical release and some of the trailers that had either different effects or different dialogue, or dialogue that was missing entirely. In 2017, Sony released Spider-Man 3, the editor's cut, which removed some scenes, added in other scenes, and extended one other. But even with that officially released cut, there are still missing scenes that can be found in the movie's official novelization. And it's within that novelization that we discover what was supposed to happen to Eddie Brock and Venom. Spider-Man 3 had a lot of cut material. There's a whole other character in Dr. Wallace, played by Adrian Lester, who filmed scenes with Thomas Hayden Church's Sandman and even filmed scenes for the climactic battle. When asked by Spider-Man 3 archivist William D. on Twitter in 2018 why he was cut, Adrian Lester replied, "Sam called me personally to apologize for having to cut me out of the final edit. He said the film was running at just over 3 hours. A lot had to be cut, not just my stuff." For what it's worth, Spider-Man 3's editor Bob Murawski told a Reddit user in 2022 that there was never a 3-hour cut of Spider-Man 3, though William D. believes around 45 minutes to an hour of footage was cut from the final movie. William D. catalogued all of this cut material on Twitter in May 2018, taken from DVD behind-the-scenes documentaries, interviews, trailers with alternate shot and special effects, on-set photos, and, crucially for this video, the Spider-Man 3 novelization, because that book has an alternate death for Venom. The novelization reads,
"He lowered the rebar to meet the oncoming Venom, and Venom, staggering from the ringing, was unable to control his forward motion. He impaled himself upon the makeshift tuning fork that Spider-Man had fashioned and gasped in surprise. The deadly pike dropped from Venom's hands. Peter had taken care not to make the wound mortal. Eddie Brock would be in a world of hurt for a long time, but it wasn't intended to be fatal by any means. With any luck, though, it would be fatal for the symbiote because of the tonality." Peter's eyes widened in shock. Whatever the symbiote had done to him, it didn't compare with what it had done to Brock. It slithered off of him in response to the sound assault, but it left nothing behind. All that remained of Eddie Brock was a smoking skeleton, and Spider-Man couldn't help but wonder in horror if Brock had even been present at all. It might well have been the alien creature all along, talking and acting the way it believed Eddie Brock was supposed to. The gelatinous black goo reared up, forming a hideous face with gleaming fangs and serpent-like tongue. It absorbed the materials of Eddie's form and fashioned it into its own rudimentary body. An arm or tentacle or some sort of appendage emerged from its amorphous structure as it snarled, "Never wound what you can't kill." It snared Spider-Man by the leg and started to draw him forward. It opened its mouth impossibly wide, ready to swallow Spider-Man whole. At that moment, a desperate Peter spotted a sling suspended from a crane. The sling was holding what appeared to be hundreds of steel rods. He fired a web line, snagged it, and yanked it with all his might. The sling tilted wildly, dumping out steel rods, which in turn struck against the girders as they fell. A virtual hailstorm of 80 ringing rods pierced the creature in rapid succession, the sonic vibrations ripping it apart bit by bit. The symbiote sizzled, evaporated, and Peter was sure he had heard the creature screaming in protest as the last of the black goo burned off into an inky smoke.
But that's just from the novelization of the movie, right? Why should we take any of those words seriously? Movie novelizations are a fascinating part of film media, often maligned by other writers and those who work within the movie industry. They are essentially an arm of the movie's marketing campaign. Mel Gilden, who wrote novelizations of Beverly Hills 90210, once wrote, "Generally, novelizations are considered to be the scum of literature, one step above comic books written by hacks for morons." Raymond Benson, who penned tie-ins for Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough, wrote in 2011 that writing a novelization comes with several difficult challenges. Firstly, a writer will be given a 120-page script that only accounts for about 40,000 words, which isn't enough for a full novel. So writers will often extend scenes or, if the studio allows it, create whole new ones. Gary Hendricks writes in the November-December 2011 edition of Film Comment that the movie novelization had a real surge in popularities in the 1970s before the invention of home media. If you saw and enjoyed Escape from the Planet of the Apes in theaters, there was no way for you to go back into that world other than the movie novelization. But what makes these books so interesting is that they are usually written at the same time the movie is in production. And a movie script will change during production, and the story might even change once it's in the edit suite, which means that the novelization is written based upon early drafts of a movie script before those changes are made. This can often lead to movie novelizations featuring scenes or ideas that are not present in the final product because they were cut during the film's production or in its post-production. Hendricks writes, "Imagine an alternate universe in which the killings in Halloween are the result of a druidic curse cast by the god Muk-Ola, or in which E.T. the extraterrestrial develops a sexual fixation on Elliot's mother." Both of those were ideas during the scripting of John Carpenter's Halloween and Steven Spielberg's E.T., but were cut during development. And this is why people found the ending of Spider-Man 3's novelization so interesting. Was there really a time when, rather than Eddie dying leaping for a pumpkin bomb to save the symbiote, and instead would have been left on screen as a smoking skeleton? Many believed it was. After all, the Spider-Man 3 toy line, which are also sometimes designed based on early drafts of a screenplay or early concept art, had a showdown between Peter and a detached symbiote. More telling was this Diamond Select statue, released in September 2007, which is titled The Death of Eddie Brock. And back in November 2006, an unfinished trailer for Spider-Man 3 leaked online and was promoted by sites like Ain't It Cool News until Sony asked them to take it down. The trailer saw pre-visual effects shots, concept art being used in its place, and unfinished special effects, but it featured this 1-second frame, which shows the symbiote attempting to reattach itself to Peter Parker as Spider-Man, presumably in the film's climax, just as Peter David had written in the Spider-Man 3 novelization. Perhaps the biggest smoking gun came in 2016, when this skull was put up for sale on Prop Store from Spider-Man 3 called Venom Skeleton Puppet Head. Photos from the set, which can be found on the bonus features of the Spider-Man 3 DVD, also show that an animatronic Venom that would have been larger than Eddie Brock's Venom was used for filming during the movie's final battle. This animatronic, made by Frontline Studios, was auctioned off in 2018, and in 2019, El Fett posted to his YouTube channel a video of the animatronic still working. Little of this is documented in Grant Curtis's The Spider-Man Chronicles, which contains his full production diary. He writes that the Frontline animatronic was brought to set on May 2nd, 2006, but then does not detail what happened to it following that. All of this only furthered internet rumors that this death scene from Spider-Man 3 was not only shot with the skull prop and 1-second frame as proof, but it was edited and put into the final movie, only to be removed when test audiences found Sam Raimi's body horror far too scary. This Reddit post in 2020 claims as such, and several websites, including Screen Rant, have used it as a source. But what really happens? Well, for starters, Spider-Man 3 was not screened for a test audience. In speaking with the movie's editor Bob Murawski over email, he told me there were no test screenings for Spidey 3 or any of the first 3 Spidey movies. Murawski tells me that there was never a skeleton ending for the movie, but could not confirm when it got taken out of the script. I reached out to the book's author Peter David, but got no response. In interviews about the movie, Raimi has said that he had a lot of creative control over Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, but that was not the case for Spider-Man 3. He told Empire in 2009, "There were different opinions on the third film, and I didn't really have creative control, so to speak," which did lead to some speculation that the changed death scene was something that Sony or Avi Arad asked for. Murawski denies this being a studio mandate, saying that everyone was just trying to come up with something cool and dramatic. While Murawski was unable to confirm just how close the original death scene for Venom in Spider-Man 3 was to the novelization, though he does confirm in a separate Reddit post that the novelization was indeed based on the original draft with additional scenes added in, he did elaborate to me on what the original ending was supposed to look like. He said via email, "After Harry was flung to his death, Eddie became supercharged. He turned into that big animatronic Venom, which clumsily advances on Peter. He stabbed it with a sharp metal bar, and the black flesh melted off of it. It was a skeleton puppet for one shot. Then all the melted goo reformed into a super giant monster Venom. Black tendrils attacked Peter, pulling at his body and face. Wires were glued to his face and pulled to create the effect as the giant monster Venom grew and hovered over Peter. Peter spotted a barrel of rebars hanging above, broke a hand free, webbed the barrel, and spilled the 100 rebars onto the Venom monster. They impaled it into 100 places, and it finally died and dissolved." Which is, without the smoking skeleton, basically what is written in Peter David's novelization. Murawski explains, however, the whole thing was too complicated, expensive, the animatronic Venom looked plasticky and bad, and Peter was too passive, pinned in one place the entire time. In the end, Sam Raimi worked with storyboard artist and second unit director Jeff Lynch to come up with a new ending that would see Spider-Man trap the symbiote in a sound cage and then blow him up with a pumpkin bomb that Eddie Brock died reaching for. Murawski explained it was a lot more active and clever for Peter, and gave Eddie an additional moment of being a weasel. In the other version, he never really came back. He just stayed Venom and was killed as Venom. As for the skull that was sold on Prop Store, Murawski says that it was shot for reference for visual effects, but was never intended to be used in the movie. Grant Curtis wrote in his Spider-Man 3 production diary on May 19, 2006, "The final battle has by far been the hardest sequence we have ever had to film for any of the Spider-Man movies. Nevertheless, although tired, we had a real sense of pride as we wrapped tonight. When we started on April 24th, the scene was like a mountain that seemed impossible to climb. But with some creative thinking and a lot of hard work, the final battle is behind us." So, there you have it. If anyone tells you that there was this gruesome alternate death scene for Spider-Man 3, tell them what really happened. Or point to them to this video, because every view counts. With all this success, it's hard to imagine why Fox was so reticent to make Deadpool in the first place. Why did it take over 10 years to finally get the first movie made? And who did leak that original test footage that eventually got the movie the green light?
My mom was like, "What does this button do?"